We need to start making more conscious material choices.
I set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Welcome to the third day of our Biggest Div 2019, an online event series curated by the MacArthur Foundation that aims to shift mindsets and inspire action towards a circular economy. My name is Laura Franco and I will be the host in this session. In the past couple of days, we've explored a lot of ideas, stories and innovations from all around the world. But in this session, we will be taking a closer look at the challenges and opportunities that we face in this new era of information and digital technologies, and what this means in the context of cities, and more importantly, to the people living in them. I would like to remind you at home that this is an interactive session and that we want to hear your opinion. So please post your comments and questions in the comments box on the session page you are watching this on, or on Twitter using the hashtag ThinkDiv. To help us understand this topic better, I have with me a human-computer interaction researcher. Welcome to Mara Balestrini. Welcome, Mara.
Thank you.
First of all, we would like to understand, what is a human-computer interaction researcher?
Human-computer interaction is a research field that sits in the intersection between computer science, engineering, design, and human factors. We study what's going on in the intersection between human beings and technology. We look at how humans use technology from in terms of perception, cognition, in terms of social behaviors, so that we inform the design of technologies that are more usable, user-friendly, as some people say, and that can actually augment individuals in their capacities rather than continue designing systems that can only be used by other technologists.
Thank you. And what is it that brought you into this world of digital technology and information?
Well, I've always been so attracted by technologies. So I started playing with hardware and software quite early. I used to be a journalist over 12 years ago, and I was writing about technology. And I realized that this was going to totally transform society, and it could just have such an impact in basically everything that we do. And I thought, rather than talking about how others create technology, I want to be someone who is heavily involved in the design and study of new systems. So I left the newspaper where I used to work, and I pursued a career that ended up with a PhD in computer science, and then with me being very involved in technology and society projects.
Thank you. And I know you are also the CEO of Ideas for Change, which is an innovation agency that advises cities and companies. So could you tell us a bit more about what you do there and why?
So Ideas for Change it's a very particular company. We do consultancy and research, and basically we are very focused in understanding what happens in the intersection between new technologies and social change, how technology is changing society. And our approach is to study this all the time so that we can anticipate these changes and propose new approaches, new systems, new products that lead to a better society. This kind of comes from the realization that a lot of what's going on is us reacting to the fear of the changes that technology is bringing into our society. We don't want to be reactive, we want to propose, because we think that a better society is possible, but we just need to anticipate these changes and channel society and technology in a way that we can achieve positive outcomes.
Thank you. We will be coming back to the work that you do at Ideas for Change later on in this conversation, but I would like to dive into the topic and ask you the first question, which is, why is this expansion of information about us something that we should be interested in?
So for the last 20 years, we have seen how technologies have been embedded into our everyday lives. Everything that we do is mediated with technology. We wear technologies that collect data about our body and our experiences. We use mobile phones, we do online searches, and moreover, our cities have become packed with sensor technologies. And these technologies are collecting data all the time. And this data is being used by companies and governments to make sense of our behaviors, of what we do individually and collectively. And obviously, if you don't know what data is being collected and what data is saying about you and your patterns, then you're at risk of being surveilled or controlled, which is incredibly problematic.
And what is the name of this, of this that is happening? I think, we both know it has a name, and I would love you to explain a little bit more about it to the audience.
This has been recently articulated as surveillance capitalism, mainly because the idea is that technology companies create services that include features that have been designed to collect certain data about you. Sometimes the objective of the feature of the app or system is to give you a service that has nothing to do with the data that is being collected in the background. So you are completely unaware of what data is being collected. And moreover, who is collecting this data or who has access to this data and for what ends. So this has been labeled surveillance capitalism because on the one hand, these are surveillance technologies, and on the other hand, because they are being sold to whoever wants to pay for them and has something to in turn sell to you based on that data.
And do we have any idea of where this information goes?
So the ecosystem of data technologies is incredibly centralized in some big players ranging from Google, Amazon, Facebook. Now, the thing is that there is a plethora of smaller companies that are also buying and selling this data, so these intermediates. And we have zero information of who these companies are. And the clear example is if you look at the cookies in your web browser and you see all the companies that have access to these cookies, then you realize how many intermediates there are.
And what does this mean in the context of cities, for example? What are the risks that this poses for our privacy as citizens?
I like to use this quote by Richard Sennett, who said that in the smart city that we have today, Romeo and Juliet would never be able to fall in love because citizens are increasingly surveilled through these technologies. I mean, and it's not so much about some people think that this is not a problem because they think that they have nothing to hide. Now, the amount of information that can be gathered only by looking at metadata, for example, it can already compromise your autonomy as a citizen. For example, it's not so much the content of your conversation, but rather who you are talking to and at what time and with which frequency. That says so much about the relationships you have or how you move around in the city, where you go and at what time you go there, what means of transport you use. It can say so much about the type of things that you consume or the type of gangs that you frequent, and therefore it can allow for inferring or understanding what type of political values you would support or not, which in turn can be used in propaganda or to micro-target you to get you to vote for one or to buy something. And this is, of course, it threatens our autonomy, and it ultimately can threaten the freedom in our democracies.
So I think that what you are saying is that they collect this data and then they use it to predict how we will behave in the economy. So the things that we will buy, the places that we want to go to, the concerts maybe that we would like to go, and then they offer all of these things to us, which then we keep purchasing, and we don't really realize how much information about us is there. Like, it looks like they even know more about us than we do, and we don't even know who they are. So what are the consequences for democracy, for example, in cities?
Yes, there is this example that is frequently discussed. For example, there was this 13-year-old girl who was pregnant, but obviously she didn't want anybody in her family to know that she was pregnant. But what happened is that she started browsing for some products online at Target, and then Target identified that she might be pregnant because a lot of pregnant women buy these products. And so they started targeting her with advertising for products for overtly for pregnant women until her father figured out that she was pregnant. So this can happen in the small cases, but if it's used massively, then of course you can imagine the type of outcomes that it would produce. For example, Cambridge Analytica is a great demonstration of how this data being collected massively, it can be then used for political ends, so that you are targeted with very specific messages that certain people know that could nudge you in one direction or the other. There was this little feature that Facebook tested where if they told you the percentage of your friends who had voted already in the elections, they could increase participation. So they would nudge you to go and vote. So imagine if they could select who they show this message to, and who they don't show this message to, and the impact that this could have in the outcomes of the elections.
And could you tell us a bit more about that Cambridge Analytica, just what you were explaining a little bit more? I would like you to elaborate a bit more for our audience who maybe hasn't heard about this.
So Cambridge Analytica was a company that basically what it did was harvest, it was discovered that they had access to millions of data from millions of users, and this data was used in order to micro-target users and send them political information in favor of certain parties. It is said, although this data is being investigated by different researchers, that the effect of the Cambridge Analytica case or use of data was favored Trump in the American elections.
Okay, thank you. And actually, we have one question from the audience already, from Clive, who is saying that China has started ranking citizens with a social credit system, and that can lead to embarrassment and punishment. Do you think that these social rankings are going to become more frequent?
I think this is incredibly problematic. Well, thank you, Clyde, for the question. This is something very important that is happening. I often say that we have like the geopolitics of power now in terms of technology are America, where you have basically the Wild West, where it's technology first, and then they apologize in Parliament for having done the things they did with their data. And you have a hyper state-owned data ecosystem in China, which from the top down is using these technologies, including face recognition, to rank people, to discriminate among people, and obviously this can lead to very, very problematic outcomes in terms of democracy. And you have in the middle Europe that is trying to fight this and establish a more citizen-centered ecosystem with efforts like GDPR. So hopefully in places like Europe, such approaches such as rating people won't happen at the governmental level. But this is not to say that companies are not using this to rank people. For example, there's a company in America that is, if you give them, there's an insurance company that if you give them your Fitbit data, they will give you a discount in your services. But obviously, in the long term, what happens is that they'll know how much you walk, and they'll infer how healthy you are, and you shouldn't be surprised if the cost of your insurance starts creeping up with time.
And do you think, you mentioned GDPR, do you think this is a good step into regulating what companies and what people are doing with this amount of data?
I think it is a good step because regulation is very much needed. What is happening now is that the ecosystem is incredibly unregulated, and of course then companies use these spaces to push the limits of what is acceptable in terms of the use of data. Now the problem with GDPR is, although there are some details in the policy that could be improved, the problem is that yet it has been stated, but it cannot be totally implemented. You go to your city council and ask them to give you all the data they have of you in an interoperable and readable system format. This is not happening. We need to move beyond stating new rights into infrastructuring new rights so that we can really enact our new agency. And this is a technological, legal, and social challenge.
Yeah. We will be talking about the opportunities and what we can do about this as a huge issue. But I would also like to understand, would you say that digital technology is separating, let's say, societies between the watchers, so the people who are unknown and are actually controlling this data, and the people who are being watched? Do you think that we have this divide, or are we actually, all of us are part of both roles?
This is an interesting question. My key concern is who watches those that watch, because these people are not accountable for what they're doing. In a lot of these examples that we shared before, I don't want to think that we are reaching a Black Mirror society. I think that we are at a stage where this can be changed, but for now I would say that there is a minority that has a lot of access to a lot of data, and then a majority that has, although they have the legal right to access this data and so on, we don't have the skills, we don't have the capacity. So yeah, in practical terms, it could be said that we are being watched.
Thank you. And we have a comment, a question from Joanna as well on the website, who's saying that regulation can't solve this and companies will always find a way around the rules. Do you think that this is the case?
I think that this person is right in the sense that judging from what's happened in the last 10 years, then it's right. But on the other hand, I think that we need to demonstrate that you can have an ethical business. That companies have increasingly more to lose than to gain from doing this. And so we need to create the legislation and the opportunities and investigate what new business models are possible, so that companies want to be more positive or more fruitful in how they use data. So what I hear about this huge issue is that it's basically creating an unequal amount of knowledge, and what I believe it leads through an unequal amount of power. Do you agree with that? Well, for centuries, it's been like that. Whoever has access to knowledge has power. Now, I have to say that now we as citizens have more opportunities than ever to produce knowledge and to access knowledge. We have created the Wikipedia, which offers knowledge services to the entire humanity, and we have done that collaboratively and online. So to me, this sheds light on a potential positive future.
And we will be talking about that in a second. But just before we continue the conversation, I would like to have my colleague Rob remind you of some of the sessions that we have coming up at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's TIFF.
Hi, Rob from the DIF team here, to give you a couple of recommendations about the sessions you should watch today. Firstly, is the vintage motor or F1 pit stop, choosing the right repair model for consumer products. Watch this session to find out how these experiences can be crafted and how this affects long-term scale-up of circular business models. Then, why the rental and subscription-based model will lead the new generation. This session involves how Latin America are implementing the rental and subscription-based models to promote circular economy. As always, don't forget to use the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter to comment and ask any questions. You can catch up on anything you missed and find the full schedule at thinkdiff.co, or on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's YouTube channel.
As you can see, we have a lot of sessions coming up at the DIF, and I would like to remind you one more time that this is an interactive session, so please put your questions and comments for Mara in the comments box, and my colleague will pass them on to me. So Mara, coming back to the topic, we have explored some of the risks that this uncontrolled expansion of information about us and about how we behave have in our society. But we also know that there are abundant opportunities that raise from this issue, and that citizens can use this information and technologies to address some of the problems that they might have in their cities. And I think you have a great example from Barcelona that you could share with us.
I absolutely believe that when people have access to producing and governing their data, their agendas move forward. And this is the way to go. I mean, not causing fear and paralyzing people, but rather opening up opportunities for people to gather the potential of data and move on their agendas. The case of we had this great opportunity to work with citizens living in a square in the city of Barcelona. It's known as, it's called Plaza del Sol. Mm-hmm. And this is a place where citizens have been complaining for years mm-hmm. of noise pollution in the area. And we, working with them, we co-created 25 open source sensors, mm-hmm. Building on the Smart Citizen Kit technology. Mm-hmm. And we deployed them, the 25 sensors, in the balconies mm-hmm. of the residents living around the square. Mm-hmm. And for 6 weeks, they collected noise data 24 hours a day, every 5 seconds. This created the data commons of noise pollution on the square, the largest one ever created. Mm-hmm. This data demonstrated that they did not have a perception of noise pollution, but actually the noise levels in the square were way beyond what's recommended by the World Health Organization, mm-hmm. and also beyond what is established by the local legislation. So with this data, mm-hmm. citizens had the opportunity to sit with the city council and negotiate changes in the architecture and in the cleaning protocols and in the use of the square mm-hmm. that were aimed at alleviating the problem of noise pollution. In this case, citizens were part of assembling the sensor technology so that they understand what is a sensor, how it works, collecting the data, governing the data together, that is co-creating a protocol that says who can access to this data, under which conditions, and also using this data in a way that benefits them.
And I would love the audience to be able to see some of the photos of this project. I think we have some that we will be showing in a sec. So what can we see in this photo,
So
Mara?
in this picture, you see Rosa and her daughter assembling a Smart Citizen Kit. This is an open source Arduino at heart technology, and they are going to take this sensor and install it in their balconies so that this sensor starts to relay noise data. In the next picture, we have citizens making sense of data. This is super important. Mm-hmm. Most people have never seen what sensor data looks like, mm-hmm. leave alone, trying to make sense of it. So in this project, we looked at different ways in which we could advance people's data literacy mm-hmm. by showing them what the data looks like in very tangible ways mm-hmm. and creating tools for people to analyze the data themselves. In this exact moment, they are analyzing the sensor data, and they are realizing that they can prove that noise levels definitely go up at the times in which they are supposed to be sleeping, which proves that they're having these noise levels are affecting their sleep patterns.
And I've heard that you have not only done this in Barcelona, right? You have also had pilots in other cities. Was there any difference between the results in different cities?
Yes, the Making Sense project was led by BAG Society in Amsterdam, and I did it when I was working at Fab Lab Barcelona. And we deployed 9 pilots, 3 in the Netherlands, 3 in Kosovo, and 3 in Spain, focusing on noise pollution, gamma radiation, and air quality. In Kosovo, for example, the pilots also rendered really interesting results. One of them was reaching the point at which a new policy for air quality was discussed in Parliament. So this really shows that when people have the capacity to produce data, to control the data, to make sense of the data, they can use it in ways that create public benefit.
Oh, this is an amazing example. And do you have any other projects that you are working at the moment, that also show the potential of this opportunity?
I have a number of other projects. One, for example, is called Denosis. Denosis is a project that encourages people to map odors. Odors in cities tend to be indicators of other sustainability problems. But sensing odor is very difficult. In fact, the best sensor for odor that's ever invented is our nose. So the technology in Denosis actually helps people to use their nose to map odors in a way that is compatible to how scientists would investigate this. And therefore, it allows for creating huge evidence that combined with data of the environment and the wind direction and so on, allows to identify who is the odor emitter. And this really helps to tackle these problems at the city level. We have 10 pilots across the world. We also have another project called Cities Health. This is a SWAFS project funded by the European Commission. We have 5 pilots, and what we're doing here for the first time is not just collect environmental data on air quality and noise pollution, but actually collect how people are exposed to these pollutants and how their health data can show effects of this pollution in their well-being. So this is the first time where citizens are informing a research protocol entirely, co-creating the research question, collecting the data that is environmental and their health data, and analyzing the results and assessing what to do with these results, either policy change or more tangible actions at the urban level.
Okay, so I was actually going to ask you about the consequences of doing things this way. Do people change their behavior when they know the information that is being collected about them?
Absolutely. It is very interesting to see how when people start co-creating these technologies, making sense of data, they become aware of how much is at stake when it comes to data, how much can be learned about data. For example, I remember people living at the Plaza del Sol, when they had the noise sensors, they would realize that only by showing the data, they were saying so much about their personal life. For example, if I'm at home or I'm not at home because I'm making noise or not. But actually, things that you may be doing at night at certain times and with certain frequency can also be identified in the noise data. So having people participate in these sort of data projects makes them definitely more aware of data, how it is collected, what it means, and also the huge potential that it has when it is in hands of people.
And how do we ensure that citizens make good use of this data and this technology? I think there is a project that you've been working on called Decode, and which we also have some photos that we can share. And yeah, could you say what are the tools that you can use in order to make this process better?
Data governance is a huge field of study right now. So basically what we're looking at is in which ways citizens can come together as a collective or even individually and govern their data. So what we're seeing here is a workshop where we were discussing with different people under which conditions they would be willing to share sensor data. And what we did is, after reaching agreement, we created, the Decode technology team created these technologies that allow for people to apply these preferences as smart contracts on top of the data. The way it was done, I think there was another picture showing this. The way it was done is basically in their mobile phone. Citizens have their sovereign identity, identity, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to say that the data that this sensor produces is yours, so that you can govern this data, you need to pair it with something that identifies you, right? So this identity was held in the mobile phone. The mobile phone is paired with the sensor, and then these combinations of attributes on how people have agreed to share the sensor data can be enacted through smart contracts. So what is happening here is that this person, in this case Lucia, who you see in the picture, will install the sensor at her house, and the sensor will be collecting air quality, noise pollution data, and this data is going to be shared as the community had agreed to share it. For example, it's aggregated and it's anonymized for the general public. However, the city council can see it with more granularity, and members of the same sensor community can see all the data without it being anonymized, etc. So it shows how people can apply different layers of governance to the data, and how this, it kind of shows us an ecosystem where people have more agency over the data and can decide how to share their data with different stakeholders for different reasons, and then also change those settings as they believe, when they think they have to.
Thank you, Mara, for sharing these two great examples. We actually have a question coming from Twitter from Claire, who's saying that this seems like quite small scale. Do you think it offers a genuine alternative to the technology monopolies who have access to data of hundreds of millions of people?
I think this is a really interesting question. There are other projects currently being done with data on a larger scale, for example, to advance treatments and for Alzheimer or for cancer. But in this, so there are other things being done, but the projects that I just described are experimental situated projects that have the size that they need to have for the goals that they want to achieve. So for the ones on very specific pollution cases and so on, we're interested in working in very situated contexts. However, we do need to scale up. And for this, we need to discuss some very important challenges, such as data infrastructures and how to do this in the large scale. The truth is that a huge percentage of the data that we produce in Europe ends up in the Americas, and that we do not have the capacity to establish standards and protocols. So if we want to scale up, we need to solve scalability problems, and we need to discuss data infrastructures, because otherwise it is absolutely true, we remain at the very local level.
And for this, we need to work, of course, with corporations and the public sector. And Ideas for Change, I know that it works with corporations and companies like Repsol and Air France, and you've also worked with city councils from cities such as Barcelona or Bristol. So what have you learned from working with them, and what is it different between the public and the private sector in this field?
Well, I mean, I think more and more companies begin to realize, well, some companies begin to realize that the world has changed, that citizens have more agency and more capacity than ever to access and produce data. And they've realized that it is not good business to hide things from people. And they're looking at ways in which they can be more transparent, and they can collaborate with citizens to shape new services and new products. So obviously, when a company comes to Ideas for Change, it's because they have already taken this decision to move towards more positive impacts, because they want to start using data in a way that is more positive. and so on. And the difference is, and also the same thing happens with city councils. Now, obviously, in my experience, sometimes politicians will have an agenda and they don't want big problems to emerge when it's a time of a campaign and there are elections and so on. So sometimes you have to work with them, help them understand that, people are not necessarily looking to create scandals based on the data, but actually that it is people want to participate, people want to bring these problems to the surface, and they need to be negotiated. And so basically, what I'm trying to say is private companies, governments are increasingly understanding the new power that people have, and some of them are trying to shift towards collaborating with people, following more participatory approaches to create new products, new services, or new legislations and new participation mechanisms. And this is good. It's still not the norm, but I see this happening more and more, which is good.
And so how would you summarize the role that the policymakers have in regulating all this data? We've touched upon that earlier in this conversation, but if surveillance capitalism is a human-made phenomenon, I'm assuming that it's also quite hard to fix, because it would require us to tackle the essence of the problem, which is that they benefit from having all this information about us. So how would you summarize like the role of policymakers? We also had a question earlier on, which was also really related to the role of policymakers. So I just wanted to emphasize a little bit more that.
Obviously, I mean, there is this tension in terms of time. When you have to regulate, you need to, policy happens at a certain time with certain procedures, and technology innovation, it's happening at a much faster pace. So obviously, there's always going to be this friction. Mm-hmm. However, what I'm seeing is, for example, the joint research, the policy lab at the European Commission is increasingly exploring more agile ways of co-creating policy. And this is something very important. Policymakers are realizing that they need to be more agile in their procedures so that there's no such gap between policy and technology innovation. But at the same time, I think that we cannot be playing, a situation to see who's faster, mm-hmm. and who's the cat and who's the mouse here. Mm-hmm. What we need to do also is to create new ethical frameworks to inform the design of technologies, to create alternatives so that technology designers can actually embed these values into their technology design. I don't believe, as a technologist myself, as someone who is in the field of technology, that these are bad-intentioned people that want to destroy the world or our democracies. It's a problem of the business models and creating tools and infrastructures and best, good practice that informs the design of new tools and services.
Thank you, Mara. I would like to ask you a question coming from Sarah on the website. She's saying that for the circular economy, she's sure that there is some data that is more critical than others to collect to accelerate a circular economy transition. Could you give us some example of some really useful data that you would recommend that cities collect? And what is currently stopping this data from being collected? So maybe let's address first the first question. If you could give us some examples about information that is very useful for cities to collect.
Well, for example, resource flows, mm-hmm. and how you can, so increasingly companies like Provenance by Jesse Baker or Materion by Liz Corbin are looking at ways in which you can trace how the life cycle of a product, and also see which are the elements that make a product and what is the life of these elements. If we had this data on flows and on supply chains, then we could definitely plan better for more circular economies. But obviously this data is often obfuscated and there are a lot of intermediates and so on. And one of the challenges associated to doing this at a larger scale is exactly that, the scale at mm-hmm. which our products move. Mm-hmm. So, and how you can, obviously legislation and plans are local, or they depend on local legislations. But if a product is coming from China, then obviously it makes it much harder for you to be able to trace exactly all this. So I don't think, although you can do a lot of very interesting pilots like Thomas Diaz from the Fab City Initiative is trying to do at the city level, I think that the problem that we have is of monumental size, and it requires systemic innovation, and it requires that interconnected systems share data with each other. And of course, this is not easy to do unless we have the right policy and the right technical infrastructures.
Thank you, Mara. I think that the last question that I would like to ask you is like, what is your vision of the perfect city of the future? I mean, probably perfect, yeah, it's never possible, but what in your opinion could be, how would you envision a city in the future?
I think that a key concern that I have is how we have become so fragmented and so polarized in the past few years. And I think we need to create a better society. Would be a society where people have more equal access to information, but also to the skills and the tools that are necessary to produce and make sense of the information. Otherwise, we're going to create a situation where people are increasingly more polarized, which opens up the door for mainstream manipulation. So a city of the future is a city where there is obviously more equality and more access to opportunities to develop the skills that are necessary to make sense of data and to participate in the governance of our technologies. And finally, I think that there is a huge there's a huge opportunity for the public sector to be the one carrying the flag for the democratization of technologies, and also investing in the infrastructures that would create an ecosystem of technology sovereignty. Like one day they invested in creating highways so that everybody can move around, goods and services and people. Then we need to understand what are the highways and what are the infrastructures and the public infrastructures for technology to flourish and for data to be used for the common good.
Thank you. We have touched upon a lot of different topics that we could, spend hours talking about them. So I hope that this is the beginning of a very long conversation about all these issues. For our audience at home, what 3 points would you like to underline for them to, take away from this session?
That the future is not something that will happen to us. That the future is something that we create. That we have increasingly more agency and more power to participate in the creation of that future, and that data is not the new oil, but the new soil upon which those possible futures should be co-created.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you for coming all the way to our studio, and thank you for this very interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me here.
I would like to thank the audience at home for watching this session, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did. And of course, as my colleague said earlier, we have a lot of sessions coming up at the MacArthur Foundation's DIF. Today at 1 o'clock GMT, we will have D.S. Smith and Costa Coffee discussing how they aim to tackle the issue of single-use takeaway coffee cups. And please remember to catch up on everything we have going on at thinkdiff.co.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.